Hi, I'm Yvonne Prin, and I want to take you on a map tour of God's preparations for Christmas and the coming Messiah. The Christian faith is grounded in space and time. Our faith is not a fanciful story, but one rooted in true history that took place in real places. This series of maps, and most of them came from Wikipedia, Creative Commons licenses, not anything fancy or esoteric or specialized or whatever, commonly available maps, illustrates the places God's incredible preparation for the birth of Jesus took place. All the maps are of the same area at different times and emphasize different parts of the story. Now, for a detailed lesson on what I'm showing you here on the 7 parts of God's Advent, and it's really an extraordinary story, plus downloadable handouts of the maps and much more information, please go to www.bible805.com. But now let's get started looking at the maps. First of all, this all took place in the Mediterranean world. This was the home of God's chosen people, the nation of Israel, which was founded by Abraham. Now his sons Isaac and Jacob lived there, and then Jacob's 12 sons went to Egypt, where they lived for 400 years and grew into a nation. Now, after God brought his people out of Egypt, the next major thing and the map that's important is what happened when they didn't obey God. They were brought out of Egypt and they had a covenant with God that they were to only worship him and they were to live in the way that he wanted them to. If they were obedient to him and they did this, he promised to keep them safe in the land. But if they didn't obey, he also promised that they would be judged and taken out of it. We all know the story, or well, a lot of people do. If you don't, what happened is they did not obey and they were taken out of the land. And this is the first major deportation. This happened primarily to the northern kingdom of Israel, which was the capital was in Samaria, and they were scattered into all of these different areas. After them, Babylon came in and conquered Assyria, and unfortunately God's people did not obey. They saw what had happened to their northern neighbors, but they didn't obey, and so at this time the people were taken from Jerusalem, and many of the leadership were taken to Babylon, and others were just scattered all over the Babylonian Empire. Now, what's interesting is if you think about it, not only were the Jewish people scattered all over, but once they settled down and had families and they were no longer captives, they were just people living in the land, they brought with them the worship of the one true God. They set up synagogues to be able to worship him, and they all had copies of God's written word promising the Messiah. Now, after the Babylonian Empire, it was conquered then by the Medes and the Persians, who didn't do any major deportations. They just took people as it is, but they were then conquered by Alexander the Great. Now, what is significant here is a picture of Alexander's huge empire. He conquered all of this area, and not only did he conquer it, he was actually a very, you might say, very benevolent conqueror, and that he wanted to better the entire world through passing on Greek culture to them. And one of the ways that he did that was with the Koine Greek language. He required that all of the areas he conquered speak Greek. And even the ones that he did not conquer, we have Rome was rising in power, and some of the other areas, they still learned the Koine Greek because they wanted to communicate with the largest political group in the world at that time. Next, of course, came Rome, the next great empire that took over this entire area. They not only conquered the whole area, but they imposed what is called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, and they built the Roman roads. And what's so extraordinary about this is the first time in all of human history that people could travel safely from one end of the empire to the other. Here are some of the areas that around the time of the apostles the Jewish people were scattered all over these areas. Now, because of both the Pax Romana and the Roman roads, the Jewish people who were scattered throughout the known world had their scriptures, their synagogues, their belief in the one true God and the coming Messiah. Now, all of them were linked together. And of course, Acts tells us what happened next. Many who traveled these roads showed up in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. And go back and read that passage in Acts. We just kind of skip over it usually, but where it says Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs. I went through and I've marked some of the different areas that are listed. Here's Cappadocia and Pamphylia and Rome. But what's really extraordinary is, just think about it. Anyone from any one of these areas, and Jews who had been previously scattered all over this area, in part because of their disobedience, but we know God used it. They were all over this area. They were able to literally walk safely to Jerusalem down here for the day of Pentecost. And some have said, it's never been as peaceful and as easy to travel, even today, as it was at that time, for the fullness of time, for Jesus to be born, for Pentecost to come, and for the Christian church to get started. Because we know, too, that not only did the Jews travel there for Pentecost, but many of the same areas, the same Roman roads. And it's really interesting, if you just trace Paul's journeys over the different Roman roads, these were also traveled by the Apostle Paul to share the gospel. And what would he do? He would go into a synagogue, which chances are had been founded hundreds, if not 1,000 years earlier, by people scattered, maybe because of very difficult and hard times, but they were scattered in all these far areas. He would go into the synagogue. He would read the Greek scriptures that Alexander the Great, they required them all to speak Greek. Their scriptures were translated into Greek. Everybody knew Greek. He would speak that, and they had been reading all of their life about the Messiah that was to come, and now Paul preached to them. He said, the one you've studied, the one you've looked for, let me tell you all about him. When we see how God has worked in history, using real places and real people in real times, as challenging and more than what we are living through, to bring all the chaos to a good conclusion, to tie it all together, in this case with the birth of Jesus, we can't help but praise and trust him at how he will work for good with all the scattered puzzle pieces of our lives. I wonder, too, millennia from now, how we might look back from heaven at our time on earth and understand what divinely ordained story we may be part of right now. Until then, let's praise our God who works all together for the good of those who trust him. That's all for now. For related materials and links to a podcast and videos suitable for a class, small group, all sorts of related things, please go to www.bible805.com. Links to the website, other resources, they will be below this video on YouTube if you're watching it there. Be sure to subscribe to this channel because there's lots more coming up to help you know, trust, and apply the Bible. In closing, I'm Yvonne Prin, your fellow pilgrim, writer, and teacher for Jesus. And until next time on Bible 805, may God surround you with his grace, assure you of his love, and fill you with his peace as you walk with him now and forever. Amen.